Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a new podcast here all the way. We have Nancy in the UK. And Nancy, thank you for taking the time. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. Thank you for having me.
I mean, at least last time we were, in Sevilla, a little bit warmer area. And, we had a very interesting panel at that time, and I think we're obviously following a little bit around the guidelines of that sort of panel in today's topic. But before we dive into this very important topic, which is sort of like a hot topic these days, and probably as you're familiar with, I think it would be good, for everyone here, Nancy, if you share a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you do at Umbrella Analytics and so forth, so all our viewers and listeners can get a little bit better sense of who you are.
Sure. Okay. So, I'm the founder and CEO of Umbrella Analytics, and we use data analytics and machine learning and natural language processing to help companies improve diversity and inclusion.
Right.
So we help them to understand where there might be bias in their organizations. We help them to understand how to communicate more inclusively and how to really tackle some of the underlying structural inequalities that we all know and are in society, and that's really been a hot topic, as you say, over the past few months with Black Lives Matter and the impacts of COVID for everyone and all of those things. So this is very much in people's minds at the moment.
For sure.
So we help them to do that. My background is that I come from a career in publishing. I worked in publishing for about 20 years, and then I left to found a startup, so here I am today.
you kind of saw a problem and just jumped on it, and
pretty much.
I think you guys have been understanding a lot of the challenges that the industry is facing in that regard, and obviously that's usually how those startups comes to life, similar to ours, different industry, but we saw a gap and a challenge that had to be solved. But speaking a little bit about challenges and what has been some of the typical challenges you have seen in regards to creating a diverse workplace, because obviously it's not just straightforward line of doing things, and I think also helping, I guess, educating those organizations about, okay, that's actually what is the current situation, and if you could just share a little bit about what kind of typical challenges you've been facing and seeing on your road so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges, but I think there's a couple of things that come up often with organizations, one of which is often the people at the top of the organization don't necessarily see the problem, because they're successful, they've reached to be the CEO or whatever they might be, and actually they think the organization is pretty good, but people lower in the organization see a different thing, which is they can't get the promotion, or they find it difficult to get jobs, that kind of thing. So often there's a bit of educating of the leadership team to say, this is real for your employees. This is a real issue. So that's often the first challenge. I think what we then see as well is it's quite difficult to undo the legacy that organizations and industries have. So we'll have people say, well, there just aren't many good female candidates in this industry, or there aren't many good ethnic minorities applying for roles here and things. So there's kind of a pipeline problem that goes back into history, and it takes time to undo those problems. So I guess I see those things quite a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, obviously, speaking from a sport industry perspective, it's pretty clear and pretty common, been a very male dominated industry, and I think as well also the sport industry has a lot to learn of open those doors and opportunities, and I think obviously already they've been taking a lot of initiatives in order to help doing that with leadership women football and women in sports tech and other organizations that obviously try to emphasize of and even us, we're about, creating equal opportunities regardless of, gender and ethnicity. And it's all about, what kind of value that you can provide. And I think, there's a lot to learn there, but I think a lot of the steps too, as you talked about, is like educating and understanding that it's a problem.
Yeah, and I think we're definitely seeing like a lot more conversation about all of these issues. I mean, across all sectors, but in sport as well. Like in the UK, we've had a lot of discussion about why there isn't more, why there aren't more women racing in Formula One, for example. Which actually, theoretically, anybody should be able to do as long as they've got driving skills and things like that. So I think, there's a long way to go till we get to loads of women driving Formula One cars, but, the conversations are happening, people are educating themselves, people are trying to understand the problems, and I think that's a really good start.
But I think you also need to understand, that it's not just an overnight, kind of like thing, it will take time but what I see as well, and I mean, like, of course, like that's where you and us and other players, I mean, like you obviously doing, more directly than us in a sense, but I think, like, speaking of sort of like our generation and the younger generation, I see a much more open and acceptable community of, like, again, it's not about these kind of elements, but like, what kind of person you are. So like, more about what's inside and focusing on what kind of value that you can provide. And I think we're in sort of like this changing environment, which is obviously why things are coming more and more up. Is that just out of like kind of like a follow-up, like obviously you've been speaking with a lot of organizations, probably some young leaders, probably some old leaders. Have you seen like any difference in terms of like how they perceive this challenge? And
yeah, I think you're right. I think that like younger people that I speak to are much more transparent and much more accepting in the way that you've described, and perhaps that's because we've grown up, or they've grown up in a very digitally connected world, in a way that perhaps like my parents' generation didn't really travel abroad very much, for example, and things like that. So, there was a chance that you might not meet people from different ethnicities or different countries. Whereas now, because people are very connected across the globe, and internet communities can form across all sorts of different dimensions, I think there is more acceptance. And I also think there's more transparency. So when I speak to younger employees and things, they're very open about, what they earn, what they want to earn, what their ambitions are, what they expect out of their career. Whereas perhaps when I was growing up, I was always taught more to keep that stuff a bit more private, and have your own plan, but don't necessarily talk about it. And I think that is a shift that we're seeing. And of course, the more people enter the workforce with those attitudes, the harder it is for the people at the top to resist that, if you like. Because the numbers are changing and the demographics are changing. So
sure. And for those of you that kind of like, I don't know, jumping in, at some point, I know like we have like these live like running like Facebook Live and like YouTube Live when we release those, but we're kind of like talking about the importance of a diverse workplace, and obviously touching a little bit about like how this is also impacting the sport industry, because obviously that's the industry we love. Nancy, you've been, I dragged you into sports at several occasions. I think you're starting to get like a little bit into
you're convincing me that it's an interesting industry.
That's great. I mean, like, it is, though. You can't deny the fact that it impacts a lot of people, It
impacts a lot of people, and that's very interesting. And I think particularly when you think about like some of the big conversations around race and things which have emerged from the sports world, whether it's like Serena Williams in tennis or whether it's Colin Kaepernick in NFA, and these are big, powerful figures that have a lot of impact. And I think that's really, really powerful, actually. So I think it does impact a lot of people, and it's a really interesting way to get these debates out in the open.
Right. And it does showcase how important sport is, not only, from, what they're doing on the field, but from like spreading a message, spreading, equality and diversity, in general, So I think the athletes itself has a very powerful role, and that people should not take, for granted, and not the players and athletes themselves as well. But going a little bit back to obviously our question, and I think, there's a lot of people that, a lot of our listeners are kind of young, and maybe don't know exactly, why is that like having a diverse workplace important, and kind of like how can you, and I think also an interesting thing is like, how can you build a proper strategy around this implementation? And what I mean about that is essentially, you've seen a lot of examples of people like, okay, yeah, we're going to be more diverse. And then, there's no structure to it, so you sound like do it just because, it looks good on the numbers, but not necessarily, like, again, what we talk a lot about is like, who is the best fit, for the organization, regardless of, sort of like, you just don't hire like, a man or a woman or whatever it is based on that. There should be a complex, total element of like who can provide you the most, value. So like, what is just like sharing a little bit about like why is obviously this important, and kind of like how you can build a proper strategy around that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like we've talked like obviously about the kind of social justice side of this and like the kind of moral reasons why this is important, but it's important in businesses as well, because diversity of thought brings, better decision making, better innovation, better agility, and like if we've learned anything over the past few months, across the globe, it's that those things are really important to make businesses sustainable. So it's important because it's the right thing to do, and everybody should have those equality of opportunities and outcomes in particular, but also, there are business benefits to it. Yeah. But you're right. I think often organizations will say, oh yes, we want to do more about this. Right. And they tell a good story about that, but actually when you look at the organization and people's experience of it, it's rather different. Right. So what we do is really encourage organizations to look at their data. And that doesn't just mean like numbers in a spreadsheet, although that's important too, like who is in the organization and how diverse is that and how represented do people feel at all levels. So not just, do you have women in the organization, but are they at all levels? Do you have people of different ethnicities at all levels? Because often that's not the case, people get stuck. Yeah. But also looking at data in terms of language, unstructured data. How do you talk about the organization? How do you talk about your employees? What are your values? Yeah. All of those things are really important. And often I think companies think they can just kind of put a diversity statement on their website and that's enough. Right. But like, we're very good at humans as kind of sensing what people really mean. Yeah, there's what they say and there's what they mean, and we're very good at that. We do it very intuitively, and I think we're very good at seeing through those things. We say, well, that just putting a statement up when you're doing all of these things, and I can't see anyone who looks like me in the leadership team, and I can't get promoted, and I experience microaggressions regularly that aren't challenged and things. That's the gap that we try to get people to close. Yeah. So it's not just about doing some big initiative and having a pride event and having a Black Lives Matter event. Those are great things to do. Like, don't get me wrong, but you have to back it up. Yeah, but I totally agree with that. And that's why I brought up the question too, because I think, when that's going back a little bit to the hype, around, the diversity element and like Black Lives Matter and all of these initiatives, right? Where everyone is like I talked to a lot of, friends, and we're not going to, spread out too much on this, but everyone talked about like, kind of like, okay, yeah, you posted that black square, on Instagram, and like, so many people that did it. And I honestly, wasn't one of them that did it, but for me, it's like, yeah, but like, how many of those like that did that black square actually, care, like besides that, like, if it's just that black square, like, what does it mean? And of course, like, we're not going to dive into like every person's, opinion about this, but it's kind of like, it goes back to you, like, talking about like backing up, what you're saying and what you stand for. And I think, for us too, it's like, we're very clear about what we stand for and how we can help and contribute, and what is important for us.
Looking into the future, the beginner faces a choice that leads him to the triumph, or not. Being surrounded by like-minded professionals can be the best guarantee that you actually take that crucial career step.
Sport in Global is a digital network for sports jobs. It gives you the chance to be involved in the sports industry no matter who you are, regardless of gender, nationality, and experience.
Our AI system matches up talent with human resources. Candidates who align with the company's values and needs immediately get shortlisted. It saves time for HR and increases the opportunities available to applicants.
The platform identifies tailor-made recommendations based on user needs, so you're always aware of the possibilities out there right now.
Sport in Global is a place where students gain key tips about jobs and build the valuable connections that are essential for people at the beginning of their career path.
The path from candidate to champion starts with a single step in the right direction. Sign up to Sport in Global.
Sport in Global, the best way to enter the sports industry.
And we also got to understand our role, of like what is our, position and what is our responsibility. And for us, in sports as well, like wanting to be the leading recruitment platform in the sport business industry, it's clear that, okay, like how do we represent, the upcoming generation, the future of the industry? And for us, it's about creating equal opportunities, regardless. And that's pretty clear for us. And we want to stand behind that. And we're doing initiatives to stand behind that too. So I think as you said, it's like people need to be very, clear about their like what they stand behind and work on those premises.
Yeah, I lost you a little bit there, but I think you were talking about your position in that
right. Let me just do like a rewrap, and then you can just cut this part. I gotta find it after, but what was the last thing you said, and I can dive in.
So you were talking about like how you're trying to understand your position and how you can bring diversity into what you do. I think that was where I cut off.
That's easy to jump in again. So obviously, like just looking at what, as you talk about, like how every company needs to like, back up what they're saying and not just, oh, we're doing diversity as a word and as a nice sentence, and, that they put words behind, like they put actions behind their words. And for us, being wanting to become the leading recruitment platform for the sport business industry and, helping the upcoming generation and leaders, then it's very key for us that we're, fighting for equal opportunities, and we're, showcasing that we're actually doing things in order to actually make that, accomplished. But we've been very true on this, like since day one, that, okay, this is what we stand for. And this is like, this is based on the partnerships we do. This is based on, some of the initiatives we do. And I think, the sport industry, even if they have been a little bit behind when it comes to as well, like, being a very male dominated industry, I think now more than ever, like I'm not saying, there's a way to go, because there are, but I think you're seeing more and more of a change, and which goes back again to like, how are we, being open and transparent, and again, like it's about the value that you bring, that's what it comes down to. And who are you as a person? And again, as you touched a little bit upon values, how are we, mapping out, someone's values up to the organization's values, so you can get people again that can provide value in the best possible way. And for us, like we don't care, what you are, what your purposes are. Like all we care about is like, what is the value that you can provide us, and do you fit into like how we're thinking, what we stand behind? And I want to say, I mean, like, and this is sort of like more of a personal preference, but I think there will always be some sort of like difference. Like there will never be like a 50-50 split. Like in my head, like I see like there would maybe be like a couple here where it's like 60-40 and the other way, maybe like 40-60 the other way. Like it's just like there would be like some natural fluctuation, you know, in this space. And I think people need to realize that too, and not just, oh, it's always going to be 50-50, because I don't like that mindset. I like, people need to think it will be some ups and downs here on the scale, but as much as you try to like balance it out of, again, who are the most and best suitable candidate, and how can you help your organization to have those ranges of people, but that can provide the value, you know, that is in the organization. I just want to hear kind of like your thought process on this, because I know it's been a very sort of like, oh, it should be this percentage and this you know, sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think like the world is complex and, you know, it's not going to be straightforward.
Right.
Even if we wanted to, for us to just say we need 50-50 men and women, or we need, you know, X percent ethnic minorities or whatever it might be. But I think, like, you're right, it's about the mindset. It's about understanding that people can bring value to your organization regardless of their background and their history, you know, their sort of personal history. And that's where we see the problems in the past, which have been very much like, you know, oh, you went to the same university as me, so you must be the right person for the job, right? And that's how you get, you know, the kind of old boys network at the top or whatever. And I think it's that shift to saying, okay, what are we missing out on here? Like, just because we're insisting that people should have gone to this university or have this kind of background. And then, like the numbers don't, you know, in a sense, don't matter if you created that environment. Because everybody should be in that conversation. I think it's about helping people to see where they've put those barriers in, or they've taken those actions which have prevented other people having that opportunity, even though they might be equally or even potentially more capable of bringing value to the organization. So that's what I try to focus on, is what are those barriers that people face, and how do we try to remove those and give them the opportunity to get to the top in the way that maybe they haven't always had. And then it's up to the individual, right? You know, if they're great at the job, then hopefully we can build a world where that gets rewarded.
Hopefully. I mean, like in theory, you know, and I think more and more in practice you will see that. But I mean, like every organization is different. Every organization has their ways of doing things, and I think like there will always be like this sort of gap. But I think as we talked about, like in the future too, like with the upcoming generation, there's a lot more openness and transparency, which will create like kind of like the premises of what is a natural thing, you know, in the industry moving forward. And talking about barriers in sports too, because you sort of like touch upon, which is sort of like a big issue in sports, is that you know, it's very typical to hire people that you know, sort of like out of like, is an easy route, you know, to go around. Because obviously the industry is sort of small, right? It's a small industry nonetheless. If it's super global, it's still a very niche and small industry. And the problem there is that you're like, you know, you can have, and we talked a lot of, you know, organizations and people around this too, where, you know, they just hire, you know, someone's, you know, brother or, you know, someone, you know, that they know, because it's fast and it's easy. And and again, I asked the same question: how do you know they're the best person for the job? They don't. You know, they honestly they don't. And this has been a huge issue in sports, and I think also like helping breaking that barrier of like take the time now to actually, you know, make sure that you get the best candidate, because also, like, you know, as you know, like it's expensive to hire the wrong person. You know?
Right, exactly.
Especially now more than ever, you know, most organizations can't afford hiring the wrong people. So I think you know, in the situation we are and everything going on, I think people will be more open for it. And obviously there's a change and a barrier that has to change, you know, both in the sport industry and in general level. But I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on that.
I was just going to say, I think that's really true. And I think you know, people in the past, people have often taken the easy route when they're recruiting. So like you say, like, maybe my brother or my cousin or, you know, someone that you know, someone that I know could do this job.
A friend
and
of
all
a
it takes is that, friend of a friend, right? And as you say, all it takes is that change in mindset to say, maybe the easy route is not the best route.
Right.
Maybe I just need to spend a little bit more time, find a good range of candidates, you know, which is not impossible to do. It just takes you making that decision as an individual to go, I'm not just going to hire like the friend of a friend because it's easy. I'm going to take that time, do a bit of thinking, try to be a bit more proactive. And that's the change that I think we need to see. And I think we are seeing.
Right. But it's also about like, you know, like, and I think like obviously that's why like tools like ours and yours, you know, are coming into place too, because obviously we want to help, you know, officiate those kind of processes. So you can continue doing what you're doing, but we're just helping you a little bit on the road of, you know, making that smart decision, whether it's obviously for understanding your diversity data and like working on that. And then from our side, of course, like helping you recruiting those kind of people, you know, in your organization. And when we're talking about recruitment, obviously we've been talking a little bit about this before, and I think this is sort of like a new thing for a lot of people, and probably it's very hard to spot, you know, in general. And I mean, like even for us, you know, like working on this, you know, it's not easy, and sometimes, you know, you just kind of like, you know, go at of it that's very natural, you know. But talking a little about keywords, you know, and metrics in job descriptions, like what are some ways to create a more, how can I say, like open for all job description? And I think you need to explain a little bit of like what we're actually talking about here, so people understand.
So a lot of the work that we do is looking at how to optimize job descriptions to appeal to the widest possible range of candidates, and what that really involves is looking at the language. So we have a lot of research. There's a lot of research around how different language can attract men and women differently. So by changing the language, you can change the demographic of people who would be interested in that role. And the same is also true with some social mobility and ethnicity. There are certain types of language which can create a barrier for people. And what we try to do is analyze that language and say, if you just change this a little bit, it's a small nudge, but it will just open up that possibility. Because what we see in organizations is they say, we just don't get the candidates. Like people don't apply for the job who are women, or people don't apply for the job who are from an ethnic minority background. And we say, well, there must be a reason for that, right? Those people are out there. So let's look at the way you're advertising your role and try to understand what it is that's stopping people even applying. Because you can do great things like with how you select people and the interview process and all those things. But if they're not even coming in the pipe right from the start, you know, then you're missing out on that talent. So we really look at that job advert and job description as the interface between the organization and the people they want to attract. So we help them to look at their language. So, you know, things like talking about being a leader. There are ways that you can talk about leadership that will make people to feel that they have those qualities. And there are ways that you can talk about leadership which will make women feel, actually, that feels quite masculine, and I'm not sure that I'm that person, sort of thing. And looking at things like, you know, trying not to use jargon, trying not to use like acronyms, trying not to use kind of like those terms that people in the industry know about, but people outside maybe don't. Because again, you think, well, I don't know what that means. Maybe I can't do this job. And actually probably it doesn't really matter. So we do, that's what we do. And we look at like the length of your job description. We look at how many requirements you have. So, you know, what we tend to find is when people recruit, they will say, here's all the things I need. And it'll be like this massive sort of laundry list. And when you question them, really there's 3 or 4 things that they really need. And then there's lots of things that they like, or that they're used to having, or that they've just put in because it sounds good, like being organized or whatever it might be.
And in many cases they have like, you know, just a standard PDF, right, of like information that they always done, you know, which is like, you just change like the date of it and maybe like, and then you repost it, you know, like, which is obviously like, well, why we're doing what we're doing on the job posting side too. But
yeah.
I mean, like, I think it would be interesting, like, if you could just bring up like some like key words, like key examples of like what is like some typical mistakes like that people, like, just at a obviously general like baseline.
Yeah.
What would be sort of like, some words that people like, would look at a little bit differently, and that you can change to make it more.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are quite a lot of words like dynamic and aggressive. Aggressive you see a lot in kind of sales roles, like aggressive chasing of sales targets.
Yeah.
And like, obviously we understand what that means, but it's a very masculine kind of word. So if you can say, I don't know, challenging or stretching sales targets, or we're passionate about hitting our sales targets, that's a very different feel.
Yeah.
So aggressive I see a lot, and I always pick up on that myself. And then things about sort of directing people rather than talking about, say, supporting people or empowering people to do their job. That, again, it feels quite different. It's talking about the same thing, like management and leadership, but it's talking about it in a different way. So, there are just those small changes that you can make. And also just talking about the company and what it does to support its employees. I think companies often forget to talk about this. And, like, if you've got great policies for kind of working parents, or if you've got great policies for career development, let people know about that. Because,
what are the perks?
And actually, I think companies often undervalue that. They think that people are just looking at the salary. And of course we look at the salary, but there's a lot of other things that might make you...
I think also moving forward, it's like going back to like finding an organization that fits you well, whether that's it's also like, say you have a kid or, something, right? And you need like, those kind of like, do they have a good program for like helping you out with that, or, what it might be. So I think that's a really, valid point. I think people, understands that a lot. And, coming from like, the sport industry with like ticket sales and like, especially in the US, we're like, 70, 80 calls per day. And you're like, the American sales industry is pretty rough. And I think there's maybe a lot to learn from that, because you also see like there's especially in sales too, there's like probably like, and I'm not going to say like, percentage, but there's a very high percentage of male vices women there, for sure. Because you also, like, as you say, you track what kind of people are you attracting, with the description of what you're, how you're approaching it. So I think that's a very, very valid point. I think there's something to think about there. And that's more of a knowledge piece, right? Because I mean, like, it's not easy, even if your mindset, might be, in the right sense, like, you're kind of like just used to writing it that sort of way. So you just don't think about it, as like how you can make it a little bit more, how you can, again, like synonyms,
exactly. And again, that's like where for us the technology comes in, because it is hard, right? And like you said, you've written maybe this job description 100 times or 10 times or whatever, so you're just kind of like reiterating what you always say, and that's why we use the technology to just have a really easy check that says, okay, here's some things that maybe you could just slightly change, 2 or 3 words, and it will make a difference, so like trying to use the technology to kind of overcome that, I think is an advantage that we have today.
That's the beauty of technology, right? So we're about to wrap up, and I think we could talk a lot about this kind of topic. It's very interesting, and I obviously have like my own sort of opinions and things to related to the sport industry too, but you just kind of like, as a final step here, like what steps do you see like companies can do today, to start creating I like a diverse workplace? What are some of the things you can kind of like start with, to kind of like get the ball rolling?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important question because it can feel like a really big problem.
Yeah.
And I always say to my customers, just let's take the first step. We're not going to change the world on day one, but you've made a step, and that's important. And I think recruitment is a really good place to start, because the reason I say that is because you can't fix the organization unless you fix the pipeline, right? Because you can't go into your organization and say, oh my God, we've got loads of like middle-aged white men, we better sack them all. You can't do that, and it wouldn't be right to do that.
No, that's also true, right? Like, you can't just suddenly just like, oh, let us cut like half the organization.
Yeah, and like, that's just not practical. So it's about thinking like, how do you tackle the issues from the front of the pipeline? But also, I think the thing with recruitment is, if you're a company that's recruiting quite regularly, like maybe you're a company of a few hundred employees or something like that, that's a change that you could make right now.
Yeah,
that's not going to take months, because as soon as a new job requisition or whatever comes through, you can make that decision to handle that differently. So that's a really, like, if you're struggling to know where to start, that's a really good place, I think.
But I mean, like, okay, just I gotta tie this into sports though, because I mean, like, in general, like, the sports organization are quite small. I mean, like, obviously we have like the 49ers and everything, like 3,000 staff, right? And like, you have even like, looking at the Warriors, and it's funny, right? Because they're like, oh, we're a small organization, and there were like 250 people, and we're like in Norway, like, yeah, that's not small. But like, if you look at, this sort of level, right, where you have like, like, if you look at a typical sports organization in Norway, like, you have, maybe like, like one full-time employee, and then sort of like, volunteers and coaches and like, people that are helping out. And I think like, even for them, like, where do you, like, how do you start, right? Because maybe you don't recruit as much, and you just like, but as you still want to like showcase that. And more than ever, like, how important sports is for inclusion and diversity, and how important it is. And like, also showcasing that as an organization. What do you think, like, directly for like more smaller, or like, what can they do, in order to showcase that we are open for all, we are, kind of like this, we are trying to create a diverse workplace here?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think the same sort of thinking applies to things like volunteers and like the ecosystem around that. So even if you're a small sports team, you will have volunteers who are like maybe providing stewardship, or like, I don't know, refereeing or whatever it might be. Again, like, the same questions kind of apply. Like, how do you reach those people? Is there a way that you could reach different people and encourage them to like volunteer, or to be part of the organization, or to join the fan club, or whatever it might be. And I think the same, it's the same mindset. It's just not a recruitment process in the same way, but it's still about who are you reaching. So I would say, like, whether you've got like 3 people or 300, if those 3 people are all the same, then you need to question whether you're reaching enough people. And the answer might be yes, but you need to ask the question. You need to say, have we done enough to reach different communities? Do we just go to the same places to find our volunteers, or do we just, do we just always reach the same people? And if you don't,
do we use the friend of a friend strategy, or do we actually,
exactly,
take
or do we actually go out and there's lots of ways to do outreach, going into schools, going into, other organizations, and just reaching people who maybe hadn't thought that was something they could do. That's what you want. You want someone who goes, oh, I didn't know I could do that. That sounds great. I'd love to do that. And that's whatever you're recruiting, whether it's volunteers or whether it's fans, or whether it's sponsors or whatever. That's still a conversation you can have, I think.
Absolutely, and I think with that, I think it makes sense to sort of like wrap up for today. I think we're sort of like, I don't know if we will have like any like final remarks, sort of like as a conclusion of what we're coming out of this conversation. But I think like for us in sports is that I think it's you obviously look at your recruitment is sort of like as the first sort of like step, because that's essentially where it begins. Like where do you get your people from? Like how do you use, and spend the time and utilizing like resources, like obviously, ourselves, to like where we're focusing on helping you find, the most suitable candidates based on what you're looking for. And that might be a woman, or it might be a man, or it might be from some sort of ethnicity group. And like at the end, it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is like what kind of value they can provide. And I think you just got to be open for understanding that, and be open for, okay, how can we create great ecosystem inside our organization that has a positive and future minded mindset. Very minded. Yeah. Add a word here, but you get my point. So I mean, like that's the way I see it. I don't know, Nancy, like if you want to like just like from your side, where it is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think like whatever organization you are and whatever challenges and constraints you have, like if you make that mindset change, then you can start to resolve those problems. And some of them will take time, and some of them will be more difficult than others, but it's making that decision to say, I'm not just going to do the easy thing.
Right.
I'm going to actually think a little bit harder about whether I'm doing the best by the world and by my organization.
Right.
Because you're missing out on people, right?
Exactly, right.
These could be great people.
They could. And they probably are.
Yeah. So I think you're right. It's changing that mindset and saying, every time we make a decision, let's just challenge ourselves to say, have we really been, have we put that thought in, or have we taken the easy option?
Right.
And that's a decision anyone can make, right? That doesn't require money. It doesn't require, big resources. No,
for sure. I mean, like
it's an individual accountability.
It starts with you, right? And I think like it's so great that you're mentioning mindset, because I mean, like I think every sport organization, every sport professional out there can relate to mindset and how important it is in sports in general, whatever you want to do. And of course, like obviously in general, but we're very sports focused here. And I mean, like if you want to succeed, like it's about your mindset, and I think having that, positive mindset as an organization, and being open and understanding that, okay, what am I doing? What are the steps I'm taking? How can I do those steps? And, having the positive mindset, then a lot can change. Look at all your athletes that you're responsible for, what it might be like with it. If they didn't have the mindset, they would not be where they are today.
And you've got coaches, and you've got people who know how to help people change their mindset.
Right. So like, I mean, like use them as a resource. Use your coach, use your players to learn, about like why do they have the mindset that they have, in terms of like, how can you make your mindset better, and talk about that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's probably one of the most like sports related terms we can
it's a good way to end.
Yeah, no, for sure. So with that, Nancy, I would like to obviously thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure talking with you about this very interesting topic. I mean, like we've been talking about this for I don't know, like a year and a half at this point. But I mean, like it never gets old, like it's always a lot to learn. It's always a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And I would like, as I said, thank you once again, Nancy, for taking the time.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And with every video, we always finish with "Vi snackes."
What?
Which means we see you later in Norwegian.
Oh, okay. What you said.
All right. Thank you, Nancy.